Hey everyone, back in October I managed to pull off a win at Golden Demon in Germany with my Lord Mazdamundi. I managed to get a bronze in the old world category and I'm really happy with it, and I want to try again. The next Golden Demon we have coming up is at Adepticon in America and I'm really excited to go over. I haven't been before and I'm really looking forward to seeing what the Americans bring to the competition. Now, the only problem with all this is life has been a little bit crazy since the last Golden Demon and I haven't had a huge amount of time to work on any projects. So here we are. At this point in time, I'm 8 weeks away from Golden Demon and I'm going to start something. I thought it'd be really good if we started a project and worked through it on YouTube so you guys can see the processes and the recipes that I used. Although I do believe that you should paint the models that you really like rather than play in the categories for Golden Demon or any other painting competition for that matter. The truth is, I've only got 8 weeks, I can only do so much in that time frame, and it would be nice to actually come away with another trophy. So with that in mind, we're going to go for a little bit of a smarter choice and we're going to enter the Blood Bowl category to start. The model we're going to be painting for the Blood Bowl category is Griff Oberwald. And for this tutorial, we're going to start out by how we painted the pink, as you can see on screen. To start off, the model's primed in white. The reason why I've primed in white instead of black, which is what I normally do, is it gives the maximum vibrancy to the color that I put over the top. When it comes to the base coat, which you can see on screen at the moment, I'm using Games Workshop Emperor's Children layer paint. I'm using a little bit of Scale 75 Acid Pink fluoro paint and a little bit of water. So it's 1 part each. So 1 part fluoro pink, 1 part Emperor's Children layer, and 1 part pot of water. But basically what we're looking to do is create a solid base coat with multiple coats. So thin down your paint enough so it doesn't obscure any of the details and get the whole thing covered. Next up, we're going to use Vallejo model color Sunset Red. It's really important to note we're starting with our brightest color and working backwards. I want to maintain as much of the bright color as possible without going over it too much, because what's potentially going to happen is we're going to kill the vibrancy by going darker and darker, and that can be a bit harder to manage. With the Sunset Red, I'm glazing towards the darker areas and I'm glazing towards the recess, trying to work out what the volumetrics would look like. And what I mean by that is if you look at me painting the torso at the moment, the sash that goes across the torso is basically a big cylindrical shape. The torso is a cylinder, so you can see towards the left-hand side, I'm darkening down the whole thing. So the entirety of the left-hand side of the sash is going to be darker, while those folds on the right hand side will also be darker, but only the recesses. As for the leg, it's basically shading towards the bottom of the legs, and I'm going to have it brighter towards the top. So I'm trying to keep it really simple, trying to keep it really straightforward. It's also worth pointing out with this particular model, I'm trying to go for a very smooth, clean result, at least for the pink material. The rest of the model will probably have more texture on it, but the pink material I want to be as smooth and shiny as possible. So with that in mind, we're going for a glaze consistency of paint. Remember, a glaze consistency of paint is super thin, almost transparent. We're removing the excess paint off of the brush before we place it onto the model, and we're pushing our brush stroke towards the area of the model that has the same color on the brush. In this case, we're pushing the Sunset Red into the darkest areas because the Sunset Red is just a darker color. Now we do want a nice value range, as in we want a nice range in light and dark. So with that in mind, we're going to push even darker here. The paint that I'm using to push even darker is P3 Murderous Magenta. It's a really nice magenta. Now, I will say the P3 paints are now hard to get, and they've recently been sold off to a different company, and it's going through Kickstarter, and all of those paints are going to change. So with that in mind, if you don't have the P3 Murderous Magenta, a really good replacement is Games Workshop Screamer Pink base. Slightly darker, but it has the same sort of hue and it's really quite lovely. So all of the areas underneath are going to be pushed to this magenta. And then once again towards the darkest areas. So in this case, that big cylindrical shape towards the left of the sash, towards the lower sections of the leg, we're once again going to glaze that magenta into those recesses, into those darker areas. And what this will do is that bright pink that we originally started with, that we had the fluoro paint in, that's going to make that pop even more. We want that line of light that runs through the torso, because that's what's going to make it really shiny. The smaller that line of light, the more the highlight is going to pop. Now, if you go too far and you lose too much of the highlight, don't panic, because it's very easy to go back and fix this, especially as we're going with very thin paint, especially as we're glazing a lot. So if for whatever reason you need to go brighter because you've pushed too much of this magenta in, that's absolutely fine. Just get your mix of Emperor's Children pink and the acid pink from scale 75 and work up towards those bright sections again. Because this paint tends to be because these colors tend to be quite weak, it takes a little while. And we also want to push the highlights further. So we're going to end up adding white to this anyway. Now, we've got to be careful when we add the white into this paint mix for a couple of reasons. First of all, we want a nice, vibrant, rich pink. And the problem is as soon as you start adding white to something, what happens is it washes it out. You lose the color, it desaturates it. So we've got to be very aware of that issue, that challenge that comes with this. The other thing is white, the closer to white you get with a color, the more awkward it likes to behave. The more it likes to get chalky, the less it likes to go on the model nice and smooth. And you can battle this a couple of ways. You can either go super, super thin and build it up really, really slowly. I'm not a big fan of this. I find it a little bit tedious. So instead, what I tend to do, which is what I'm doing now, that bright shine line that's going through the torso, which is where I want my highlight, I go more extreme than I intend to, right? I go brighter than I actually intend to at the end. So you can see I've got that highlight line that runs all the way through. I'm placing in my edge highlights, my line highlights along the sash itself. These are really important because remember, readability is the #1 rule when it comes to miniature painting. It's our first priority. Placing in the edge highlights with this pink-white mix. This gives us a separation of shapes and very clear readability. Once we've got this in place, once I've got it neat and clean the way that I like it, the blends don't have to be perfect, as you can see. I'll go back with the Emperor's Children pink and acid pink fluoro mix, and I'll glaze over the top of it. What this does is as soon as you start glazing that original color back over the top of it, it obviously makes it darker because the pink is ultimately darker. It will also soften out a lot of your brush marks. So where the white paint tends to make things a little bit more chalky, it's a little bit harder to blend. The glazing of this color back in will actually mitigate a lot of that. It will soften the brush mark and it will make it much, much softer. The other thing, remember, we went too bright with these highlights. While it's doing all of those things, while it's doing that work for us, it's also going to tone down the white so it's nowhere near as bright, and it's going to bring back the color. Apologies for my fat head in the way, but it will bring back the color, it'll bring back the vibrancy, it'll bring back the saturation, and this is massively important because I want a really, really vibrant pink on this. The majority of this model is going to be quite dark. We're going to work with some blacks on the other parts of the fabric. So the idea with this is the pink is going to be so incredibly striking, and then it's going to be framed by as much extreme dark as possible. And the reason for this is it's almost a tactical choice here, other than the fact that I wanted to paint pink, and this is how I envision the model. The truth is, part of the first battle when it comes to any competition is you have to get the judges to see the model from far away. It's got to be striking. It's never going to get to the judging table if they don't get it off the shelf itself. So this is why I'm going for a really, really vibrant pink. Now, after an endless amount of blending, you can see that I've got it nice and shiny. I've worked up to that same mix of Emperor's Children and acid pink, plus a little bit of white. Kept the highlight really, really small. The reason why it's small is because it makes it pop much more. But we need to make a decision on how happy we are with that. Now, I feel like we could push this a lot deeper, as in a lot darker, but I don't really want to push any more pinks because I think that could be a little bit boring. So instead, we're going to shift across the color wheel and we're going to go across to a purple. Purple in this case will appear colder in comparison to the pink. So what this does is means that our bright areas of the model are really nice and warm. The dark areas of the model are not only darker, they're also colder, which means they're going to be less of a feature and they look even more interesting. So in this case, I'm using AK Interactive Amethyst Blue. Although it is called blue, it's purple when you pour it out the pot. Once again, all we're doing is we're glazing this purple into the shadow area, into the deepest, darkest recesses. Do not put it everywhere. You don't want that. But we'll say this purple is really strong. Go incredibly thin with this paint. I went a little bit too thick and it took quite a lot of work. to blend it all together. Lastly, we just need to work on smoothness. Now, you can see that I've skipped ahead a little bit here. I'm not going to spend loads of time on this video showing you the hours that I spent smoothing this, because it's just an extreme amount of work and it's not going to do any good for YouTube. There's plenty of videos on YouTube and in the members area if you want to know how to make perfect blends, so feel free to check them out. But this is the end result. This is what we're going for. Very small highlights, very high contrast, makes it incredibly striking. We're going for a very, very smooth result, not because Games Workshop or Golden Demon require that, but because the rest of the model is going to be relatively heavily textured, and if we surround smoothness with texture, it makes the smooth areas look even better than they actually are. So this is another type of contrast that we're going to try and use to create a really nice striking composition. As for the rest of the model, as I said, the majority of the uniform is going to be black and pink. The metallics at the moment, I'm toying with the idea of doing a rose, like a nice pink rose gold to keep in with theme, but we'll see how that goes. You'll see a video for it in the future. As I said, the entire video series for this will be on YouTube. So feel free to hit the like button, subscribe if you want to see the next ones, and as always, if you want to support me more, feel free to check out the members area to get even more in-depth video content. And thank you everyone for watching. Cheers.